many years ago, I taught in a different place, and I was lucky enough to teach Alissa Quart, who was ninth grade when I first met you? 11th, okay. I thought I got to teach twice. That's just in my...
11th and 12th.
Oh, yeah, okay. So, and then off she went, pursuing her dreams, and I pursuing mine. But years later, I saw her name go by on Facebook, so we reconnected that way. My favorite thing about Facebook, getting to stay in touch with students in the long run. And I saw the books that she was putting out, and I thought, we should get her to come here. So, through the grace of whoever, we made it work out. There's a great New York Times book review quote that I wanted to read you. Quart's gift as a writer is her ability to report on the experiences of ordinary people, following their realistically messy lives. Does that sound familiar? Like, following their realistically messy lives for years, offering us vivid portraits that are profoundly humane. And humane meaning both kind and also thinking about the larger issues that are shaping our lives. And as you'll hear, one of the messages in her work is, a lot of the struggles that we have, we think, oh, what am I doing wrong? And there's a message woven through the book Squeezed, her most recent book, Squeezed, Why Our Families Cannot Afford America. That it's not necessarily your fault. It's probably not your fault. There are circumstances bigger than we are that are pushing and pulling. She's both a nonfiction writer, journalist on the one end of life, and a poet. And she's going to talk today about how those two forces are still very present in her life, and about some of her life as a writer, the history of her life. She's also written the text for the Emmy Award-winning documentary film, and while that's not a big part of the talk, if you're interested in film, you want to ask about that in the question and answer period afterwards, we could probably get her to slip a few more morsels in about that side of her writing life. She's been published in The Guardian, the Columbia Journalism School. Is it their journal?
CJR.
CJR, okay.
Columbia Journalism.
Yeah, there we go. The New Yorker, the New York Observer, Neiman Reports, The Writer, Los Angeles Times, many, many places, including the New York Times, which just loves to review her work. So that's kind of fun to know the New York Times is probably going to review all your books. But poetry has been a lifelong love, I would say, right? Since, you were 5 or something, when you first met Marty. And so she's able to hold on to that as well, even while doing very important social justice work through journalism. One of the ways she does that is working with the Economic Hardship Reporting Project, there we go. Which, if I understand it correctly, both raises money to be able to pay journalists for their work. There are a lot of journalists working out there for free, thank you Huffington Post. And they also are reporting on economic issues, on poverty, and this both rewards them for their work but gets more consciousness of the financial issues that we're dealing with as Americans. So I won't talk any more about her because she'll give you a very good idea of herself with the presentation. And that'll be like 40 minutes, and then we'll do question and answer afterwards. So, Alissa Quart.
So Nancy was my utterly beloved high school poetry teacher. Can you imagine like having Nancy when you were like 16 years old and never, I remember you taught Beans of August May, do you remember?
Yeah.
Look at the language. Still the same, amazing. So, so I've written 5 books, 6 now. I have my 6th poetry book coming out. My first book was called Branded, The Buying and Selling of Teenagers, which is about corporate culture. It's kind of in that mode of no logo, early on, and then most recently this book, Squeezed. But I'm also a poet, and so I was just going to read a wee bit about of the poetry section of my life, as well as the nonfiction. And then I'd love to talk to you guys about any questions you have about how to have a literary career, journalism. I actually produced the Emmy winning film. It's called Jackson, won a Best Social Issue documentary last year, and then some other documentaries as well. So, thank you so much, Nancy, and everybody else at SUNY Adirondack for having me here. So a little about me. I had been a child and teen poet, and Nancy edited my poems on the red carpeted steps of our school. It was an art school. It sounds freakishly privileged, actually, in retrospect. And she took out all the thes and the ands. I don't know, does she do that with your poetry? If any of you guys have her? She takes out the ughs. She did not like sloppy words. She found that, and so then I went to university, and at that point I was not really a journalist, I was still a poet. They were really into difficult poetry, you know, like the kind that nobody understands. And I was trying to impress them, and I was writing all this, what's going on? But I was dedicated, and so then I had no money, but in the 90s I moved into a walk-up in New York City. And it had holes in the floorboard, like cigarettes, smoke from the bar downstairs would come in, and there was even like weeds growing in the house, and I was constantly calling, I was still writing my poetry, and nobody cared. You know, it was a hard lot. I was fact checking. I was just telling Donna about this. One of the students here. I was writing content for the early IMDb. You guys ever use IMDb? It was called Cinemania then, and I was putting in content about like obscure Hollywood stars from the 50s, and then I was writing content for CD-ROMs. This is how long ago it was, and I did quizzes for People magazine. I was a writer's assistant. I was doing anything I could, but then I was like, you know, this poetry thing's not going to work out. So I became a journalist, because back then you could be paid decently for journalism. I was in my 20s, and as a reporter, I felt the city and the country were large and exciting, and I wanted to get lost in people's stories. I wanted out of writing on my own, which is one of the problems that you guys who are studying fiction and poetry. Sometimes you're like in your own head too much. And the wonder of journalism is a lot of what you do is talking to people and going places and immersing yourself, losing yourself. And I almost felt like it was kind of a science fiction. And my happiest times are just completely entering worlds that I would never have known otherwise, like child soldiers from Liberia. I spent time with former child soldiers, spent time with them. I'd never have done that in an ordinary life. I went to Silicon Valley and I wrote for Marie Claire on sexual harassment against women. So I was spending time with these tech folks who were sort of fighting for the rights in that environment. Or Brandon, I went to all these advertising conferences, and I followed teenagers at the mall, and I wore a sparkly butterfly necklace. It was sort of like, you know, Never Been Kissed, the Drew Barrymore movie. But anyway, she goes undercover in yeah. So it was like that. So I went, you know, undercover in malls in high school. They called me their friend from Canada. At that point, I was in my late 20s. But you know, none of this would have happened if I had to become a journalist. And the perks were immediate, because strangers at parties suddenly understood what I did. They were like, "Oh, what's a poet? They're like, I could pay my rent. I didn't struggle to find readers. You know, if you're poetry, you're lucky to have 20 people listening to you. And they would just be waiting to get their drink of beer. And you're like, wait, I have another poem. No, go away. But with journalism, people communicated with me, and I communicated with them. I felt like I was finally making a difference. Now, this was in the 1990s. That was the golden age of journalism. You were paid $1 to $2 a word. And you know how much journalists get now? What? Like 40 cents. And this is part of why Barbara Ehrenreich, who wrote Nickel and Dimed, and I founded this organization 5 years ago, Economic Hardship Reporting Project, so we can pay people. And I have writers who are homeless, who are formerly professional journalists. but none of this was true. So let's sing the happy 90s, when this was not true yet, when the journalists weren't on welfare. But there were other problems, because back in the 90s, it was more sexist, the profession. You're supposed to be hard-headed, as a woman, you're supposed to be macho, supposed to go report on fires, you weren't supposed to, nobody cared about, like, Bustle, Refinery 29, all the kind of sites that now are probably popular with some of you guys. That was really looked down on. I went to Columbia Journalism School, and I was told, no, you're not going to be able to write about culture and politics. You're going to have to do news. You didn't want them thinking you were a lady journalist, as one editor said to me. So I hid I was a poet. I mean, that would have been, oh my God, can you imagine back then saying I'm a poet? And they're like, oh, you really are a lady journalist. You're so much a lady journalist, you're a poet. So I was a stealth poet. I was the one person who wasn't publishing that was actually going to the poetry reading, which made me very popular. Because poets really want audience who is not other poets. I did on the sly while I was writing journalism during the day, freelancing for publications, and writing my first nonfiction book, Branded, and going undercover into high schools. So as a journalist, I reported on those marginalized to the edges of urban centers due to real estate costs, the price tags that lurk around human encounters, and the cult of overwork in the middle class. I even wrote about, your local fast casual restaurants and how they're exploiting workers like Chipotle and things like that. And it culminated with this book, Squeeze, which is sort of quintessential of the kind of writing I do as a journalist. And I'm going to just read you a little bit from the beginning of that so you get a sense, because I don't expect everybody to read my move. Michelle Belmont's debt haunted her. It was almost unspeakable, but it was a raw relief when anyone asked her about it. She wanted people to hear about her life as she lived it, how her debt trailed her like a child's monster, how it was there when she went to the supermarket, to her son's daycare, and home to her one-bedroom apartment. It began, as it often does, with the student loans for the college. This sounding familiar? Her parents back home in Georgia thought would ensure the right future. Then there was the money she borrowed for her Master of Library Science degree. A bit later, when baby Eamon came along, she and her husband owed over $20,000 in hospital bills as well. What was shocking were the price tags, just for normal things like Michelle's labor and her overnight stay. She required a few extra days in the hospital. Eamon had been born weighing 10 pounds, 13 ounces, and she pushed that hefty creature for 5 hours. I thought that insurance helps you get by, Michelle told me, but my husband had really cheap insurance and you get what you pay for. Then the debt shadow monster just grew. Eamon developed a fever of 103 degrees and had to go back to the hospital. There were 2 years of surgeries. The bills piled up on the kitchen table. Michelle tried to pay them off for fear of getting refused treatment later. Then she stopped opening the envelopes. They were different colors. They demanded payment now or legal action in screaming capital letters. She saw herself on trial in court, explaining why she had nothing in her account. Her debt was 6 figures and growing. The couple had struggled before they had a baby, Michelle said, but then it got astronomically insane after Eamon was born. We always had money for food before, but now it's, how are we going to eat? I'll borrow from one credit card bill to pay that other credit card bill. I can't find rent money each paycheck, and we make a decent salary between us. Michelle Belmont was fighting to stay middle class. She hoped to train herself into a career of certitude, to become a technological librarian, to set up her future. But the costs were beyond what she had ever imagined, and she grew more vulnerable. Meanwhile, the squeeze tightened. The Belmonts lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Minneapolis that she and her husband paid $1,300 per month to rent. Minneapolis, with its supposed hipster status and so-called Midwest modern food and furniture, textiles, was only getting more expensive for Michelle. When I first spoke to her, it seemed unlikely that the Belmonts would ever be free of debt. That requires nothing bad to happen, Michelle said, almost laughing. But bad things do happen. So it kind of gives you a sense. I spend time with the people I write on. I meet them. The book that the Times had reviewed was the one previous to this. It was my nonfiction book, Republican Outsiders, which I worked on off and on for 7 years. So what you do with that is you spend time with somebody, in 2000, 9, and then you come back and see them in 2013. And that person is going to have had a whole life. And that's this woman, Michelle, I follow her through the book. And by the end, she actually gets out of it. You'd be surprised. She's okay. She's one of the few characters that really, subjects, I should say. I think of them as characters, I do. But who kind of got, she winds up consolidating her debt. She winds up moving to a bigger place. I think her training, her job retraining worked out. And I only know that because I got to know her well. And I don't want to deny the complexity of someone's experience when I write journalism about them. You know, I want them to have, even if it doesn't totally fit with my story I'm telling. I think it's really important to like give somebody their sovereignty. And so that's what I did with her. But she's one of the few people who's okay. But a lot of people had a lot of other troubles. Yeah, so. You know, I also was writing poetry at the time. I was writing poetry at the time about newspapers shutting down, bad tourism, moms without resources, U.S. wars. So like a lot of my poetry kind of matches my nonfiction. And so since Nancy's a poet, and I have a new book of poetry coming out in September, she thought it would be good for me to also read some of my poetry, so you get a sense of how you can do both, because you can. It's just a little harder. So this was a poem that I wrote while I was writing Squeezed, and it's sort of about my life, a little bit. It's called Apocalypse Anyway. When I believed politicians had feelings, Gerald Ford losing the White House on TV, crying, George H.W. Bush being laughed at for not understanding supermarkets. When my family lived in a one-bedroom apartment, my parents slept on saffron-colored sheets in the living room. There was never enough room. When I got into an Ivy, then when I thought I was poor, the other kids had credit cards. They went out to restaurants where they ate chicken with prunes. They had dorm rooms professionally decorated. A Roman bust stood on one girl's dresser. Her father did interiors for the Reagans. But I discovered I wasn't poor at all. When Donald Trump was most famous for a showgirl named Marla Maples, a creature of tabloid New York City. Back when Anne had drugs in her jean pockets, when she pulled out after her modeling jobs, when I learned women were trapped in their bodies, when people listened to tormented music when they had sex, when people murmured into payphones about their mental lives, the dirty snow of 1991, the blizzard of 1996, gray ice, my black wool coat too thin, I hadn't learned how to keep myself warm, when weather was literal and sometimes modernist, but not yet political, when female writers made their names denying other women's suffering, when I couldn't pay my rent, when our president read a lot, when Bill Clinton nevertheless made people on welfare pick up garbage by the side of the highway, when a pundit said alpha men, earth tones, when I started in the homage business, when I started in the lament business, when my favorite feeling was dirty nostalgia, when I read dispatches in a public park while my boyfriend went to work at the State Department. The next boyfriend bought his first pair of Prada shoes, is. When I wore an A-line dress in a 1930s green that I bought near my therapist's office, my blanched skinny legs all underbelly. When I still had a therapist because I was young and had no money, and they thought my misery had promise. When I always wore chokers as if symbolizing that I could withstand male aggression. When suddenly coffee was expensive, when people started moving to Seattle, when people started moving to Portland, when they started going off the grid, when Y2K was scary, when Y2K was a joke, when Y2K was an excuse for architects to construct mammoth futuristic buildings in frosty colors and dress us in synthetic and metallic fabrics. When a day came that I woke, biked downtown and talked to everyone I could, when the smell of the industrial products, the cooked brown sugar, the rubber, the bodies, and after September 11th, when the burning buildings began to be used as collateral to begin wars without ends, when I started biking at night with no backlights because it was apocalypse anyway, when Ariana Huffington ran for governor of California and child actor Gary Coleman ran against her, but he preferred his toy trains. When I encountered Huffington, she was so composed in a navy suit
despite the tabloid election, when that now seems predictive of Trump in the same way she was predictive of the end of paid journalism. When men who haunted women were called cads. When people stopped reading. When loving books turned into a vulnerability. When writing became a liability. When people stopped picking up the phone for reporting, and then when people stopped talking on the phone at all. Started talking about good TV shows and not themselves. When people stopped taking Prozac. When people started taking Ambien. When I stopped believing in student debt. When I realized time was killing us. The protest sign, "We shall overcome." When I didn't think of anyone else. When other people were a religion. The year 2017, when all I thought about was other people. So you can kind of see the relationship, perhaps. I don't know if you're starting to see that. I was talking to Nancy on the way here yesterday, and I call what I do docu-poetics, which is sort of like a combination of documentary and poetry. And a lot of the poems are reported. So I'll have a poem set in a set of abortion clinics that I was reporting in. I have a poem based on, a couple poems, which I'll read later, based on news accounts of horrific contemporary events. So the fact that I'm a journalist is not at all separate from being a poet. In fact, they're codependent. So, I also, for a second, I want you guys to think about the themes of squeeze too, and how that affects your life. And if there is like a poem or a piece that is within you around these questions. Because, so I've asked sometimes at this point, I ask audiences to come up with words that they might have in their head for the American dream, like what it meant to your parents, what it means to you, or I ask them to draw a picture of it. Because that is, part of it is like a fantasy that we all have of being middle class and living the way that we felt like we were promised. Middle class used to mean having 2 children and sending them to high quality public schools, right? Having a ranch house with a garage, weekends off. Like, this is not the case for most of us anymore, right? Families could eat dinner together. I had ice skating lessons that my parents taught at community college. I went to summer camp. And so that's part of the point of a lot of the poems that I'm writing, and also the nonfiction that I'm writing, and the organization that I'm running. I started to think more about that, also how it affected workers, and I wrote a poem about that when I went out to California, and it's called Ventura. Ventura. Organizers may organize closets or workers. Organizers of the very rich stack canvas boxes. Organizers of the poor, canvas workers. Gardeners blow leaves they already blew. Last week, plum trees already pruned. Elders pick the field's acrid strawberries. Their sons arrive out of season, sleep in the street, in a doghouse, in someone's car. Oxnard berries are plucked. By hand, no union, T visas, U visas, La Migra, on the same road as the Joes. La Migra? Migra? La Migra. I eat fruit crudités with the actor's son, too happy to get on the set of his sicko father's biopic. They call the doctor over there a medical gigolo. Not sure what they call a guy with a selfie stick, or the golden age LA lawyer with his expensive ghost. That couple waits for their California closets. Have they accrued, depleted, ordered, never touching the principal, drawing from their trusts, split into private educations, creative standing? Zero gravity, the name of a pedicure, actually is. Money, the phantom limb, have we kept your interest? So I'm sort of toggling there back and forth between the voice of the kind of 1% types in LA and then the workers that I was meeting when I was out around there in the surrounding areas. We had a lot of fruit picking. And then going back to the nonfiction, this is all happening at the same time, these 2 projects. So I was spending time at some places that are called 24-hour daycare facilities. Does anyone know what that is?
Orphanage?
Huh?
An orphanage?
Well, yeah, it's like a nouveau orphanage. So yeah, have you used one?
Myself?
Yeah.
No, are you speaking like a daycare that's just nonstop 24 hours where
Yeah.
kids are in and out all
Yeah.
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 I
So
used to kind of run one.
what? You did?
Well,
Yeah.
I work from home and I ran daycare from like, 5 in the morning till like 1, 2 in the morning.
Oh, okay, I won't touch you. So, so yeah, so this is the kind of stuff that is happening, and not everyone's aware of it. But 9% of daycare is now happening in the off hours. It's in the mornings, it's at night, it's on weekends. And the reason for this is because, for the most part, it's giant corporations that are eager to have people working hours in the middle of the night, and they're scheduling them by computer often. So you don't even have a manager you can argue with. You can't say, hey, I don't want this shift. I have a 5-year-old. So it's even it was Home Depot, it's all these companies. I mean, Home Depot's supposed to be a good company. But when I started looking into this, I saw that they're on one block, there was 2 in New Rochelle, New York. And I embedded myself for a week in one of these 24-hour daycares. And I had like a little kid at home. I can talk about that too, being a mom who's writing and trying to do all this stuff. But it intensified my feelings of how wrong, I mean, the daycare is actually a nicely run place, but how wrong it is that employment functions like this. And that we've gone from 30% workers in unions in the 60s to 10% now, 7 to 11, depending on how you're arguing which kind of worker. But that's why, in part, people working these crazy hours, because they have no leverage. They're not able to say, I can't do this work. And so then you wind up with these secondary, very dystopic things like this thing that I call extreme daycare, which is 24-hour daycare. And as beautifully run as this place was, it was kind of shattering to see what it looks like in one of these places. One afternoon in August 2014, the kids bounced on the center's inflatable castles, rustled around at the sand tables, and ate a watermelon snack. Then it got dark. By 8:30 p.m., 3-year-old Naima was in her pink polka dot pajamas. Little Yvette and her watchful older sister Diana were lying on thin mattresses laid over yoga mats. Even with the lights dimmed, you could make out the bright posters on the wall, the costumes and the boxes of dolls and baby clothes and the fluttering rainbow curtain dividing one room from the other. The genie was riffing as Aladdin played in the background. Dolores changed 2-year-old Caden's diaper. Next, she gave 1-year-old Noah a bath. Watching the bedtime endgame of extreme daycare, my term for rapid expansion of daycares with evening or early morning hours, or even all-night care, seemed to me to be a fretful process. I feared that even efficient, poised Dolores would be able to wash all the kids in time for bed, and that I'd have to help her herd her wards to the bathroom by myself, and then to their pallets. What if the children turned into tear-stained goblins of exhaustion before Dolores got them tucked in? How would she manage it? The main room at Dee's Tots looked like a supersized slumber party. But the truth is that this was an ordinary day. Dee's is only one of a number of 24-hour childcare facilities around the country. Just on this single block in New Rochelle, New York, there was another facility, Little Blessings, that offered overnight care as well. During the week I spent there, Little Blessings and Dee's were a nearly comic decoration off, competing for kids with colored lights and Doras and Spider-Man. The growth of this industry reflects the upheavals in American work. The huge and growing proportion of us now work an expanded work week with unpredictable working hours. This reflects, among other things, the 24/7 business environment of the 21st century and the digital economy, the freelance and gig economy, and the failure of wages to rise the match in the growth of this economy. The rise of 24/7 daycare also reflects the disempowerment of unions, and with the extreme corporate schedules that have shattered the traditional family. And then at the end, so I was there for like a couple days and nights. On one of my visits, the 24-hour kids seemed all right for now, although unusually self-sufficient. One night, Diana, Marisol's 8-year-old daughter, showed me how to perfectly squeeze toothpaste out of a tube, like in a commercial. Her 4-year-old sister, Yvette, brushed her own teeth without being asked. I saw little of the sorrow or loneliness one might expect to see in these kids,
though I did catch ripples of uncertainty and need. A few of the children did seem parentified in the useful but awkward psychology parlance. They seemed wise beyond their years, having been forced to grow up and parent themselves earlier than we might wish. Later, the Hogans played the film Coraline. Who's seen that? Yeah. A dark fantasy about a child whose real mother in a parallel world is substituted by a fake mom, complete with buttons for eyes. One of the girls, 2 years older than my daughter, turned to me and said, "Why do children think parents are going to save them?" She paused. "That's stupid."
How old was she?
And like, I guess I can tell you a little bit too about how you report to get these kind of comments or thoughts. And it was very flattering at times what you read, but I mean, part of it is like you spend enough time, and yeah, these were children, so they're going to relax in a way that adults might not. But in my reporting, I tried to spend 3 days with somebody, and then in different settings, and sometimes over years. And by that end of it, there was sort of, the photographer Nan Golden said that like she won't take photos of someone she's not friends with, but I feel like I won't report on someone I don't know. So, I mean, yeah, there are people you would interview for expert quotes, like a specialist, but if it's a character or subject in my book, I know them on some level. I feel them, they feel me, there's a real relationship there. And that's why I get that kind of honesty. And yeah, and I, you know, and the hope is ultimately that that kind of honesty will change minds about policy and other things more broadly. I like to say empathy is my metric. And by that I mean people talk a lot about impact and accountability. You know, you guys probably hear it with testing and things like that, but for in my area, in nonprofits and policy, it's always like, what's the impact? And I think empathy itself is a form of impact. So one of the things, the reason I've been doing this kind of poetry is I think there's a war happening on normal people in this country. Ordinary white-collar people. They are not just mainstream, they're simply human. They have the same need for rest, shelter, love, children, care and learning, and care for one another, and a sense of their own power. Like, that's what we have. But we are shamed for them, we're made to feel unworthy, and normal are under attack, much as the working class was before them. And this is the majority of this country, and what's not normal are the Trumps, Zuckerberg, etc. Sheryl Sandberg. And I think we need to start seeing ourselves as like, so what I'm interested in with EHRP and these books and this poetry is a political as well as a cultural movement. And to frame ourselves as squeezed, but that it's being done to us. And my refrain throughout this book and in all the interviews I've done is it's not your fault. I think it's important for people to internalize it and it's internalize that message rather than internalize a message that you're unworthy, you have a problem, you're not getting a job because you have a tattoo, or your hair is messed up or something. I mean, or you didn't get the right degree. It's kind of, Trump said, it's rigged, and indeed, the language he used is correct. It's just that his ultimate, what he's going to do about it is not working for us. So I'm going to read now a little more poetry just to give you a sense of how I take some of these feelings about troubles and uncertainty in this country and put them into verse. So this is called Thoughts and Prayers, and it's entirely based on news accounts around school shootings. It's called, it's a cut-up, it's a certain kind of poetry technique, and I'm sure Nancy can tell you more about it as well, where you look at pre-existing texts and you sort of shake them up and cut them up and rearrange them and put them into poetic form. So this is called Thoughts and Prayers. Designed and executed, us gun owners, our thoughts, our team's banner, our assault style thoughts and hashtag pray for. Praying impact terrible prayers on the scene, 15 kids, AR-15, pure evil. John 16:33, horrific, my prayers, first responders. We continue to keep the victims. Kingdom of God, Columbine, Thoughts and Prayers, Fireside Basket, the Thoughts and Prayers Clear Mount Stamp. That's looked at products. There's actually Thoughts and Prayers products. No child teacher. There's just no other way to describe it. Our hearts break for all the victims and families affected by today's terrible satiation, semantic, civil, religion, common, spiritual, language, shooting, responders. The whole country stands. My heart is with Las Vegas. We continue to keep the victim. My thoughts and prayers are with 30 million in donations. Thoughts and prayers memes. Thoughts and prayers the game. Thoughts and prayers tater tots. A thoughts and prayers makeup tutorial with invisible cosmetics. Fantasy red blusher. Blood of our children. Lifting up in prayer. All impacted by last night's despicable. Armed teachers. Relatives affected. The thoughts and prayers stamp. The thoughts and prayers handcrafted wood card. The thoughts and prayers angel pin. Hashtag pray for it. The science of thoughts and prayers. The ostensibly mixed research about thoughts and prayers. My heart is with Parkland. My heart is running down the hall, shooting our prayers. And another way that I like to sort of report poetry is I sort of will use my personal experience. So, like being quasi-middle-aged, I'm getting MRIs and mammograms. And you guys, this is another thing for poets out there. You can take anything and turn it into a poem. And it's sort of a way to sort of deal with the pain of existence, you know? If you sprain your ankle, if your mom's out of work, you can literally turn this into a poem. If your grandmother dies, you can turn it into a poem. So this was I got an MRI, and I felt like I wanted to write about it. So here we go, it's called MRI. The magnetic life-size machine sounds mistakes. The worst one, allowing youth to end. They give you a checklist of American destruction. Does your body have shrapnel? Tattoos meant to change your life? A nose pierce, the false hip, the metal knee, arrows, pinned elbows, sportif wands, the breast implant meant to make you love him, or yes, God knows, the penile. Within the magnetic resonance imaging capsule, the sound of robots, of iron chains whining loose, ferries in black water thumping their metal crossings, a forgotten nightclub, a subway's halting sparks, strangers' music. They'll check for metal, stone, mass, rip, tear. If your ring is real, it won't hurt. If it aches, you'll know how little he spent to make you his. The machine knows. We're all Saint Sebastian. So you guys know who Saint Sebastian is? Okay, so will you guys, when this is over, do a Google search, Saint Sebastian? He was one of the saints who was covered in wounds, arrows, in a lot of art, from contemporary art all the way back to Middle Ages maybe. And I saw sort of a lot of the MRI kind of looking for like holes and marks, and as a kind of, where they were all wounded basically, that's the point of that. But we're all sort of saints also. And which is sort of, I guess, the point of my nonfiction as well. Yeah, we're all wounded and we're all saints. And I mean, I guess I should tell you a little bit also about my later life. So part of why I started writing stories was personal. I had a kid in 2011. I suddenly understood that I also was entering the vortex of the falling middle class. My husband and I were older parents. Our industry was contracting, yet we now had a beautiful daughter and a $1,500 hospital bill, which, by the way, is very little. The average is $5,000 for a birth, and $15,000 up to $16,000 for C-sections. Kids don't come cheap, right? But then I got really nervous. I was like Michelle, so part of it was I identified with this. My bank numbers started falling. I was paying for my own maternity leave. And again, this is a way that we shouldn't feel to blame, because only 14% of people in this country have maternity leave or family leave at all. So 86% don't. And when you're in this, when you guys don't know this yet, but I'm sure some of you do if you have kids, but your moms know this, you blame yourself. You're like, why can't I figure this out? But again, it's another thing that it's a system error. And that's part of why many of the people I talked to in this book, and I talked to probably 100 people for Squeeze, they couldn't afford to leave the workforce, but they also couldn't afford to pay for their daycare. They couldn't afford to pay for their maternity leave. You know, so I got a nearly full-time job 2 months after my daughter was born. And then the daycare costs were consuming almost all of my pay. This is not dramatic. Again, this is the war on normal people, but this is kind of what's happening in this country if you peel back the layer. And my husband and I had no secure work or retirement plans in sight. So I felt like I had the savings, you know, I was going through them, but I had them. And I was like, I really want to know what it's like for everybody else. What's it like for my friends? What's it like for people around the country? And so then I discovered so many people are in debt. You know, there's 1.5 trillion student debt in this country. Did you guys know that? So if you guys are in debt, you're basically a symptom. You're not a you're a symptom of something that's very amiss. And you know, I had this gut feeling, who can afford to live in America? You know, and if I feel something strongly, that's when I report on it. And one of the things that moved me when I was reporting it was I found people who created DIY solutions to help themselves. So I wouldn't recommend that this is the main thing that we should all be doing now, but do you know anyone like who's done this, co-parented? Like they barter and trade, where they gave daycare and then they get housing, or no setups like that? I interviewed people who are doing this, that they're not romantically linked, but they like will live in a house and they'll eat their meals together. And it was intergenerational and it was very cool, but it was also like, why should this be the only solution, you know? Why don't we have the kind of affordable daycare that they have in other countries? I mean, in Montreal, it's $7 to $20 a day for daycare. Did you know that? So when I met these people in their 20s who were, you know, graduate students, and I said, how are you able to, they had 2 kids already. They're like, oh, it's $7 a day. Whereas the average in America goes from 11,000 to 32,000 a year. So it's just such a different situation. And you know, one of the things also that I noticed is the other effects it has the daycare problem, the maternity leave problem, all this stuff means that then people are working additional jobs, thus extreme daycare, but also they're not doing their first job so well, or it's hurting their health. So like, I hung out with a bunch of school teachers who are moonlighting for Lyft, and they're unionized school teachers, and they're grading at stop signs, and they're thinking about lesson plans like when they're on a highway. And the craziest thing was when they started driving the parents of the kids they were teaching. And this would be like around Silicon Valley, right? And it just was like, I have a dark sense of humor, and I was like, this is the ultimate Silicon Valley dream, that you have like, that your teacher becomes a chauffeur. and that like everybody's serviced, you know? And it's just very, yeah, it's pretty depressing. But, you know, one of the ways that we could help with, at least, would be to have, you know, universal pre-K or subsidized daycare. People are also talking a lot about something called universal basic income. Has anyone heard of that? Yeah. Basic income guarantee. So that's like $1,000 a month for an individual, up to maybe $2,000 per family. And one of the problems for me, I mean, I love this idea, but a lot of internet companies love it, right? Like Amazon. And they love it because they're hoping they don't have to pay their workers. So they're like, all right, there'll be a UBI, and then we won't actually have to pay someone a living wage. So that's a problem. But my whole idea, my recommendation, squeeze, is we should have a family-centered one that's just for people who are doing care work, either for kids or for elders, and it's like really, you know, kind of just, that's what it is. It's like a care-related UBI. You have a second job, basically. And it's a job that would otherwise be federally or locally funded, and it's not. So let's turn that into universal basic income. Don't let the corporations off the hook. But yeah, so also now I'm going to read a few funny poems, I hope, because it's such a downer otherwise, yeah? There's a kind of poem called abecedarian poetry. Do you know what that is? Abecedarian?
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. So if any of you guys want to learn how to write a poem like that, you do the whole alphabet, and then kids love it. But when they're like, it's a cool form when you're doing something sort of dark, because it's like, it's all these different meanings at once. So this is called Alphabetical America. And again, you'll see all the same themes from my journalism in it. A is for the aunties closing clinics. B for days of bedazzling, nights of bruxing, which is bruxing your teeth. C for constant crisis. D for damaged D lines. E is for energy, the thing that the crystal people think will save us. F is for framing devices. G for gonzo journalists getting gig jobs. H is for hat tips, for the hate film, for Homentashen. It's like a Jewish dessert. I is for the ICE high schools. They're actually, I'm giving money for a film right now about high schools on the border where they're training ICE workers. So that's where I got this line from. I can tell you more about that. J is for the jonquil-scented personal journey. K is for the kale eaters. Micropolitics equal microgreens. L is for loser, i.e. what our president calls people. M is for the militias moving from the edge to the center. N is for the neurotics nagging each other. O, the black olive eyes, the O that we come from and return to. P is for payday lenders. Q is quasi-queer. R is for rampant and sometimes random resistance. S is for a spa so-and-so, that sister in the sun. T is for the TMJ disorder, tracking the tender-hearted. U, the ushering out of Frank Underwood. V, the violent vendettas of the victimized. W, the open Harry West. She was in Arizona. I saw someone with a gun in the Dunkin' Donuts. X, a president's excised, X-rated actresses exiting and hopefully exciting and hopefully exiting. Y, the yard in NIMBY. Z is zeros for the richest toward nothingness, toward binary. Do I have time for one more poem, or? So just in short, I guess I'm going to read one last poem, but I wanted you guys to understand that you can do all these things at once, and they can help each other. And it's not common to be able to. I was blessed, I guess, to be born in the time when you could. But there are these ways. For instance, this organization I run, we pay our writers $1 a word, less expenses. And so we're sort of making it possible, and there's a growing number of places doing that. Marshall Project, the Trace, these are places to check out. Solutions Journalism Network, Fern, which is a food one, but there's a range of grist, environmental, nonprofits that have realized that journalism is under siege. 50% job loss since 2004. And 73% of journalists are on the coast, 27% for the rest of this country. And that was part of why Barbara and I founded this, because we felt, who's going to be reporting this news? Who's going to be supporting these people? And I guess I feel like you guys, there are options like this, there are opportunities, but they're probably going to be in the nonprofit sector. And then there's also that just writing itself has its own value, and reporting has its own value, and it's politically necessary. So I'd like to leave you with that. But this is my last poem. It's called In Ballard, and it's about, it's a little bit about the end of journalism. Aquarium abuts hipsterarium. My heart beats fast. Blame synthroid, that's uppers without sin. Maybe I'm breathless for obelisks of lost feeling. At 6s and 7s, over my ruinous profession, reporting used to pay for words. I'm near maritime condo clutches and watering holes spitting out old sea dogs, walking past aging Nuginis where breathing's a career choice. Self-employed, for most means still alive. The census is eternal. Marriage, a collective scar tissue webbing over extreme emotions. Cities like this marry often, I tell you. Also, there's a pro-bird ban on drones. You check your retweet. I add, against voyeurs,
We name stuff and hope that's proof. That's how reporting works. At the viewing tanks, a ginger tattooed anchored corner man, a hot algae chick, sockeye voiced you praise swimming upstream, exult in the family, the bourgeoisie. I remind that Chinook splash home, then go DOA. As water levels are different for each body of water, the lock evens them out. Panic is always in a body as well as a head. Breathe fast like the algae robots, the sprinters with gills. Beside ourselves mean we are upset but also outside our eye. Tears are a symptom, yet we are also sad. Naming is truth. Artisanal dyes, pink, blink pink, neon, announce that though we are far from home, we are still somewhere. So, I guess, thank you very much. And I'd love to take questions. I have so much to tell you about. If you guys have work-related stuff or poetic stuff or issue-related stuff, just ask away. Okay, who first? You in the back, and then
I'm interested in the notion of that you write about things you feel passionate about, and how you reconcile that with this sort of old adage that you must keep some objectivity about your subject. Do you find that it's challenging to do that when you approach it with passion?
Well, I don't think, I don't know how to say this, I don't think, I'm interested in emotional honesty, in intellectual honesty more than objectivity now. Like, I think that time of traditional objectivity is past. I do. I mean, for better or worse, like you look at the Times and it will have the headlines that are like, die Trump, not really, but like
Yeah.
the really edgy headlines that never would have existed 5-10 years ago. So, I mean, I consider myself not an advocacy journalist, but I'm an advocate for journalists. So, yeah, I feel passionately that it's really wrong that all these really trained people who are doing a public service are being paid peanuts or are out of work. And I want to try to change that. But, I don't know. I think you do need passion. And then I think after that, you can report and let the reporting lead you. And part of it is with, say, these subjects who don't fit the narrative, I let them be. So that's not, I don't know how to say, that's not objective. Like a true polemicist or advocate journalist would be like, okay, I'm getting rid of that person. They don't fit my story, but I kept that person. But I narrated how she did it, because it was important. I was like, oh, she figured something out. She went into therapy. She, consolidated her debt. She did retrain successfully.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Given the number of people you've interviewed over the years, do you believe that Americans can give up this pursuit of happiness, this American dream, for the idea of being content?
Oh man, that's heavy. Okay. Pursuit of happiness for being content. No. And I actually don't. I'm like a lot less interested in happiness than most people. I mean, I think living an interesting life is, for me, is happiness or a meaningful life. Like meaning is what I consider happy. And I think I actually really don't like all these consistencies that people be happy. I think they're a little toxic because not everyone can or will be. I think being interested, engaged, useful. These are the things that I and I'd like to see, there be a move towards that. And, part of why I call my book Radical Self-Help is because I'm hoping that people can get that from it. Like, all right, and it may not be, like, happy, but at least you can stop hating yourself. You can start fighting for things that are right and good, or voting differently and living with yourself as comfortably as possible. I don't know, does that answer? I feel like I should need to be a stoic philosopher. Yeah. Yeah.
So I just want to say thank you for bringing up Frank Underwood. That was awesome. I rest in peace, Kevin Spacey. But the other thing is I just like the character, not so much the actor. But I think that I agree that journalists are not paid enough. I've checked Dallas salaries, which makes sense, but it's not. It doesn't seem like it's similar to like teachers and stuff like that. It's not the way. What do you think has been
think at this point, like I was just telling a student here, I don't know what makes the most money, but the most, first of all, editing always makes this always better than editing than the writer. It's like the joke is like the starlet who sleeps with the writer, you know, to get the role. It's like you have to, you know, the editor is the person who has the power, and the managing editor is the person that makes the money and the power in the firmament, not the writer. The writer's the hapless person who wants their byline.
Mule.
What?
The mule.
The mule, yeah, and the creator, you know. But so you get the byline and you get to express yourself, but then you don't have a lot of security. But I think, you know, growth within our business is video and social. And so if you guys are interested in having a career in journalism, it's going to be like broader. It's going to be media. So, and I'm not a great social media person. You know, I have whatever 5,000 Twitter followers, but like I think you need to like, if you can, if you're going to leave this college and go to another 4-year, look at what communications programs they have, if they offer any instruction in social media, because it's an area now, and also in video production. Because video editing, no matter what, if it's news or not, is really well paid. It's like there's the success stories of nonfiction production. Yeah. Oh yeah, you were next, and then yeah. Sorry, you're next, and then yeah. Sorry. What's your name?
Do you think that we are even now seeing the effects of these what you call threat kids with the rising amount of people in their 20s experiencing depression and anxiety? And do you think that, like, what do you think about the mental health industry? Do you think it will change? Insane hypothetical with more people not being able to afford healthcare because they're needing like the therapy.
That's a really good question. I mean, in a way, like I want to ask that of you, or I don't want to ask you to start reporting on your peers because you're probably from the generation that was affected by these disrupted working hours, you know, after 2008, and you know, I don't know what long-term effects it's going to have. I mean, whatever, I reported this 4 years ago, so I'm not sure, but I definitely think like there's a lot more use of medication. All those numbers are up, right? And people then are doing off-label uses of like Ritalin and Oxy and all that stuff. I don't know, actually I should look into the therapy numbers for young people. But yeah, I mean, you do see parentified kids. On the same token, you see wealthy kids who are helicopter parented. So again, I think you see this sort of income inequality in parenting styles. There's a woman who writes about this really well. Her name's Annette Maru, and she wrote a book called like different childhoods or something like that. And it's looking at, you know, lower income families. They're closer physically, but the kids are freer than wealthier families where they're more spread out. There's a lot more space, but there's a lot less liberty, personal liberty and freedom. So what you're seeing, say that those subjects were not wealthy at all, and they weren't being helicoptered, but they also had sort of certain kinds of freedoms. So personally, right, they'll wind up probably able to make their own choices more, they'll be less kind of directed by their parents and the wealthier kids. Yeah.
How did you find all the people that you interviewed?
Oh, I love answering. So I love any craft questions. Because that's the connection also for me with the poetry. Like I love journalism as a craft, or like almost like an art, as much as a science. So I'm labor unions, nonprofits, playgrounds, through specialists, experts who have their own sources, online through Facebook. There's a thing called What's Your Plan B for out of work journalists. It's the most depressing place we've ever been. It's like 9,000 out of work reporters starting from like 30 to 70. And yep, I went on there. There's some people on there. And you know, I did a chapter on robots at the end, so then I found that robot manufacturers, robots are replacing nurses and pharmacists. And so I talked to people who were doing that. My favorite part of that was, favorites. I said, the robots are called the TUGs, and they serve pills to patients, and they, make their pharmaceutical thing in Pittsburgh. And the guy for the robot company, I said, oh, so the TUGs, and he's like, yeah, they're replacing the FTEs. You know what an FTE is?
Yeah, we did.
Full-time employee. And at first I was like, I literally thought it was another robot. I was like, wait, you had an earlier model? They're like, yeah, our earlier model was an FTE. I'm like, shoot, your earlier model was a human being. But that was, that's a company, right? So they have a vested interest in talking to the reporter. You never misrepresent yourself, even if you're probably gonna have a critical take. And accurately, I said, I'm writing about the ways in which robots are changing the workforce. Yeah. Activist groups, like I have a chapter on adjuncts who make under $25,000 a year. And so I go through adjunct organizing groups, which by the way, 62% of adjuncts earn $20,000 or less. And then they have, degrees to pay off. People have disputed me, they'll say, oh, they're graduates, and I'm like, oh, that's okay. It's like, all right. The school teachers who are in Lyft, I found them through the teachers' unions. I mean, I could go through step by step too. Some of the parents, like the daycare, I called the daycare. I went and I looked at for 24-hour daycares and made a list of 12 and started calling around.
You said you were always interested in poetry since you were younger. So how would you compare your younger poetry to the docu poetry that you know?
Oh, well, okay, so this is an example. This is my younger poetry. It's still monetized. It's all about money. So it's not, I have the same predilections, but it was definitely more internal and inward focused. And I was talking to Nancy White about this because I feel that I think journalism, and this goes to your objectivity question, should be more poetic, and poetry should be more journalistic. That's my only way of seeing it. Like, poetry is often quite insular and doesn't engage with the outside world or politics in kind of screechy way, but not in a let's talk to the farmers like Nancy does, or let's talk to the coal miners. So with EHRP, I've actually assigned a poet to interview coal miners, and then he's turned it into poetry, and it's going to run The Guardian. So that to me is like, with photos that I also assigned, that's like a model that I'd like to see. Yeah, just less internal, less difficult, because remember I went to the college where the teacher was like, this is too obvious. After I graduated high school, when Nancy's like, communicate with people, I had a teacher who was like, this is obvious. I'm like, oh dear. And then I started writing poetry that was like so hard to understand. Yeah, so I guess it's easier to understand, or I hope you don't felt that way. Yeah.
With your first love kind of being poetry, was it hard to make the shift into like a career as a journalist?
Well, as I said, it was the golden age, so everything was a lot easier. So like, you get an assignment, there were weird magazines that were popping up. There was like consumer magazine. There was always work. It felt like, if you're good and you make deadlines. By the way, guys always have to make deadlines. That is the key to being a journalist. You can't, and everything has to be proofread, okay, and fact checked. But yeah, so it was a lot easier for me back then, and it was an easier adjustment. I was always really interested in like history and politics, and so yeah, it wasn't that hard. I mean, I think that the big thing that I took from poetry is sound in journalism. I don't know if you could tell from the pieces I read, but they have a good set. Not good, but they have sound. They have a sense of sound. That, like, I read like nonfiction out loud, and that's not typical in journalism. Yeah.
So you're saying poetry more journalistic and journalism more poetic. Do you think you have any like recommended like pieces that you recommend in particular that you'd like to get in there?
Oh, so many. Like I don't even. Okay. Like oh my God. So do you want nonfiction? You want me to do nonfiction first or poetry?
Preferably nonfiction.
Nonfiction. Cool. Okay. Books or pieces?
Pieces.
Okay. So So I just taught, I teach at Brown University, so I just taught a piece called Sentimental Journey by Joan Didion, which is about the Central Park Five. And it's just like a masterpiece. She wrote it in 1991. I don't know if you're familiar with the case of the Central Park Five, but 5 young black men were accused of raping like a white woman in finance. And the whole city was like up in arms about it, and they were put away for 25 years, and it was a wrongful conviction. And what Didion did was she just went through, she didn't talk to a soul, she just went through every single legal, document, but also all the media, and said, these guys are innocent. And she did it in the most lyrical, elegant way, like she's bringing in, so she got raped supposedly in Central, she was raped, but by these guys in Central Park. And Olmsted designed the park, and she goes in this like wild like sidebar about Olmsted designing the park and how that made there's all these spaces where people could be harmed because he designed it in a certain way in the 19th century, because he didn't care about poor people in the park. He was just only interested in rich people during the day. So like that's an amazing piece of work, Sentimental Journey. In terms of other nonfiction, I mean, there's memoirs, of course, that some of them are quite lyrical, but reported nonfiction, Random Family is fantastic. I'd recommend that. Evicted by Matthew Desmond, who's on our board at EHRP. Behind the Beautiful Forevers by Kate Wu, which is she's also on the board at EHRP. So I sort of picked the people for the board who I thought were great writers, which is most people pick rich people for their boards. But yeah, I wasn't thinking well about this. Yeah. So God, and then if we go further back, there's a great writer called Janet Malcolm, James Baldwin. He's changing of the guard.
Changing of the guard.
Okay, is it 2 o'clock now or?
Oh.
10 to 2.
How about one more question?
Yeah.
In your opinion, American career change really started your career as a journalist and somehow?
Yes, very much so. I mean, lots of this stuff wasn't the case. I mean, as I said, my parents were community college professors who were able to, I was on scholarship at a private school, but they, I went to a private school, and they paid outright for my college. My grandparents ran a shoe store, and they were immigrants, like a teeny shoe store in the Bronx. Like, this is a really different story than is possible for most people now. And, I mean, it's happened historically. It's happened in my lifetime, in some ways, in yours. I mean, it really starts in 1979. But by the time it caught up with us, it was, more recent. It was like last 10, 15 years. And, price of public universities have doubled from 1996. Other costs have gone up by 50%, like housing, in some places, probably not around here, but healthcare, and daycare, even though daycare workers are poorly paid. And all this while our wages are stagnant. And it's made the American dream kind of out of reach. I think people used to think of the middle class as something they wanted to escape from, like something boring. And now they're like, let me in, I want to be in the boring place. I want to be in the boring place. I want to have like regular hours and a social security and retirement. I don't want to be creative, Yeah.
I've been noticing the crazy scheduling of jobs and the disappearance of the 40-hour work week and the disappearance of the weekend. And are there senators or let's talk about the House of Representatives who are putting forward bills to for labor laws, for new labor laws? And like, where can we put our energy?
Well,
Yeah.
There's been a consumer campaign, and this is something that I sort of finally coming to, that we have to also, we do have to work electorally, and I just did an op-ed in the Times a little bit about that, about what candidates can do to appeal to a middle class. They can talk about the stigma, they can talk about their own experience, and not just Horatio Alger, my daddy was a miner. It's like, no. What's your lived experience, and what's your friends living, and if you don't have one, talk about the audiences, and tell them they have nothing to be ashamed of, and that's part of what candidates have to do. But to your question about labor laws, absolutely, that needs to come back, but we also as consumers need to say, no, I don't want to shop in 24 hours. No, and that's gonna be hard because everyone's squeezed.
Go ahead.
In terms of education, I've been actively doing work for this thing called the Fair Labor Seal that I came up with in my book, and now these adjuncts groups have taken up. And I did op-ed for the Guardian, and I just did one for Boston Globe, where I'm arguing for that for adjuncts. And basically, even traditional employees in schools where they have fair work weeks. I mean, if you're an adjunct, you're not earning 15 an hour. So we're talking about 5 for 15 for fast food workers, but we're not talking about it for grain workers. And what you tell parents that you tell parents how many adjuncts are working, how much they're making. Like, that, as consumers, as I'm a parent, I'm gonna have a kid going to college. If we could make there to be like that kind of shame around it, you're worrying about whether your coffee's fair trade or your building is LEED certified, but you're not worrying about whether the person teaching your kids is paid a living wage. So that kind of consumer campaign, if it's concentrated, I feel like could be quite powerful.
Your book came up, I work in the nonprofits.
Oh, cool.
And
Where do you work?
Right here, I'm director of the United Way.
Oh, awesome.
And your work has come up, and I bought it a month ago.
Oh, thank you.
Because we're looking for a fresher way to communicate, like nickel and dime did
Yeah.
back in, 2001?
Yeah, 2001, exactly.
And because they feel like that message is not resonating now. And you said, one of the things that, especially United Way, that we based our work on is a report called the Alice Report. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's basically a report on the working poor.
Yeah.
And we put a lot of our time and effort into this. And you said something that kind of resonated with me, but I don't know where to go with it, when you said empathy is impact. Because we feel like today, our Alice people are people that are, living just above the poverty level, and our people that are poverty are being vilified, both on social media. And empathy is a hard sell. And I didn't know if you had any thoughts on how do you sell empathy?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a scholar, I think his name's Paul Slovic in Portland, who's done studies about what an image of 3 hungry kids or 1 hungry kid does versus like a citation of 1 million. And you should look into this. And it's like the power of the kind of individual in a narrative to change minds. So there's been studies in neuroscience and communications. Like, this could be ballast for you guys when you're searching for funding or trying to make the case for empathy, because supposedly it's way more effective to have 1 kid on the, and you can see it on the cover of the UNICEF brochure, than to say there's millions of people who are starving in this globe right now. So there's that. So there's that is part of it, and also like the narrative parts of it. That if you have an individual story, we think in individual stories. We do as a we don't think in abstractions. And part of what the journal's job and the nickel and dime job was to make it human and real, recognizable. And that's just kind of common sense. I mean, that's why we watch TV shows about individuals and not about millions of people. It's like we identify with 1 person. And does that help at all?
Yeah.
Okay, so Paul Slovic is a scholar, and there's other Slovic, Portland State, and I have other, or University of Portland State, I have other citations around that. You can look into his work, and he'll probably have like bibliography,
All right, well, let's